Hey guys, I'm glad you're back. So today's lesson is don't get it twisted. You know, we've all heard that saying before, don't get it twisted. But I think that the best example of getting it twisted is in Genesis 3, verses 1 through 6. It says, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and that the tree to be desired was to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat." You know, and it says, and the woman said unto the serpent, we may, you know, he asked her first, did God really say, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And so she tells him, you know, he told us we could eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but of the fruit of the tree in the midst of the garden, he said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But if you go back to Genesis 2:16 and 17, it says, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." So the serpent here is subtle, and he simply questioned Eve. He planted that seed of doubt in her that, you know, is that really what God said? Are you sure? You know, and that's all it took for Eve to get it twisted. And it caused her to doubt. It caused her to doubt what God had actually said. And it led her to not trusting God and His Word. And she began to do things on her own. And she, you know, she takes matters into her own hands. You know, we've all had those doubts that creep into our lives, and those doubts are those small seeds that Satan plants, just simply asking us the question, you know, is that really what he said? You know, and just like Eve, we run with it. We start second guessing ourselves. We start second guessing what God has said in His Word. And, you know, we think, you know, did God really mean that? Or did God really say that? And that, you know, we begin to doubt. And those doubts can come in many different forms. You know, we can begin to doubt our salvation. We can begin to doubt, you know, is God really going to take care of us? Is He really going to provide for us? Is He really, does God even see me? Does God even really hear me when I pray? You know, that doubt enters our mind, and it begins to grow, and it just begins to take over. And so we begin to take matters into our own hands like Eve did. And we begin to, instead of trusting God and just believing what He says, we begin to doubt, and we begin to reason in our own minds, and we rationalize of, you know, what actually makes more sense to us. And so those doubts lead to unbelief, and we begin to waver. And in James 1 verse 5 through 8, it says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering, for he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord, a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. So let him ask in faith, not wavering. And, if you're going to waver, he's saying you're going to be just like the wind comes and it takes those waves, and those waves are driven by the wind. Whichever the wind is blowing, that's where we're going to go. And if we're not anchored, if we're not building that foundation on the rock, then we're going to be tossed. We're going to be flip-flopping. We're going to get off course. And it said a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. We become wishy-washy. We become kind of like that fish out of water, and it's just flip-flopping around. When I read the double-minded man, I never really thought about what that meant, and so I wanted to look it up. And as I started reading it, I thought, yep, that sounds about right. And so it says, double-minded is words used only by James in the New Testament to express a lack of purity of heart or a lack of absolute trust in God. The term literally means of two minds or souls. It describes one who is trusting in God while also trusting in something else, such as self or the world. James encouraged those who are lacking in wisdom to ask God. The one who asks God and doubts is described in James 1:8 as an indecisive man. He is one who is wavering between asking God in faith and not believing that God will or can answer. He may also be one who asks God, yet resorts to his own wisdom instead of that which God provides. This person is described as one who is unstable in all his ways, indicating that his entire life was lived without a complete trust in God. And then later on, it's mentioned again in James 4:8 of a double-minded people. And James was calling for these Christians to make a commitment to trust in God and his ways while denying their own ways. So we begin to doubt, and those doubts creep in, and we want to believe God, but then when that doubt creeps in, we begin to waver. And we need to let that be our warning sign that, wait a minute, I need to stop that doubt that's coming into my mind. We need to be like the Father in Mark chapter 9. And in Mark chapter 9, there is a man that has a son, and he is taken over by a demonic spirit. And this is something that this family has had to live with since the boy was small. And this father's desperate, and he wants, because this demonic spirit has tried to kill his son, and it's caused a lot of problems. And so then in verses 23 and 24, he's brought this to Jesus. And the father comes to Jesus, and in verses 23 through 24, it says, Jesus said unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And this father knew that he believed, but he also knew that faith wasn't perfect. And so he cried out to the Lord, help me in my unbelief. He knew that he believed that Jesus could do this, but if there is any part in me that doesn't believe, help me. And so if there's any ounce of unbelief, help me, Lord. And we need our faith to be strong and unwavering. We don't need to be tossed by the wind, whichever way it goes. And we can't allow those doubts to enter in those seeds planted that causes us to question our faith, that causes us to question what God has said in his word. When we have those doubts that sneak in on us, that needs to be our cue to go straight to Jesus. And we need to be like that father and tell him, help me in my unbelief. if I'm depending on myself to get me through this situation, or if there's a part of me where there's any ounce of unbelief, Lord, help me in my unbelief. Because we don't want to doubt. Those doubts eat at us. And if there's any of that in our lives, we don't want to waver. We don't want to be tossed around. We don't want to flip-flop. We don't want to question what he has done or what he is doing in our lives. You know, that needs to be our cue to say, Lord, help me in my unbelief. Because we don't want to be that double-minded man. We don't want to be that person that is not firm in our faith, and one that just gets caught up in whatever that doubt is, whatever that sin is, and we need to just get rid of it. And the only way for us to get rid of it is just go to the Father and ask him, you know, if there is any bit of unbelief in me, Lord, take it away. Lord, help me in that. And, you know, there's been all kind of times throughout my lifetime that I have doubted, you know, whether it's I've doubted my salvation, or I have doubted that God even hears me when I pray. There's been so many times. And reading this and studying this on doubts has helped me think, you know, that needs to be my first response, my cue to say, you know what? First thing I do is I need to go to the Father and just ask for help. I need help in my unbelief, because we don't want any part of that. We don't want any of that seeping in and causing us to stumble, causing us to fail. We don't want any of that in our lives. So don't get it twisted. As we go through this week, and if there's anything that creeps in, that needs to be what we do, is just go to the Father. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I know I've learned from it, and I hope that you have a great rest of the week. And I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.